Alright, well, it's time to begin another week in our Teaching and Learning with Digital Technology class. And this week is focused on the Meaningful Learning Framework. So last week we had an introduction to it, and you learned a little bit about the framework, right? No, not really. I guess this is the first week to do that. But also remember, though, that last week you did sign up, hopefully, or you can still sign up for an Intentional Tech Talk and Integration Recipe week to present that. So there is a sign-up sheet there, and I believe we do have one student signed up to do that this week. That means whatever week you sign up in, finish it by the end of that week and get it to me. And you can submit it in the Dropbox there, and then I will show that to the rest of the class the next week as part of the week's activities. So that's a nice tool to be aware of, and if you do need help with that assignment, you can always write me, but there's also some helps right here. Website, software, and apps that could be used for the Tech Talk assignment. Creating an online presentation helps you to create the presentation part of that. And then there's the sign-up sheet. Well, anyway, this week is our beginning to learn, or our starting into the Meaningful Learning Framework. And this is an important framework for supporting the use of technology in education, in educational experiences, and making it meaningful. And so it has these elements. You're going to read a little bit about it to start out here. And there are some readings, again, in Chapter 8 and other places that you will be reading, and there are presentations on different aspects of the Meaningful Learning Framework, including active learning, constructive learning, and authentic learning to watch. And after that, you'll post on the discussion board, picking either active, constructive, or authentic learning, and then research this element. And post a good example of how this would look in a real learning situation. So example, if you pick active learning, you can write about what it would look like in a learning situation. What subject matter would students be learning about? What would students be manipulating and observing? Because those are two elements of active learning. And what role would the teacher play, and so forth. So talk about how that would look in a classroom as you pick one of those three. And then, of course, you're going to participate in at least two other students' responses, so remember that as well. I have also included an example tech integration recipe sheet. So I just talked about the tech integration and recipe assignment here. I created one of my own on Poll Everywhere for an example one. And this could be a sheet that you might, or similar to a sheet that you might create on whatever tool you choose for the tech integration. Remember, there's the part where you present about it. But then there's also the nice little sheet that you create. So this one I actually used a program called Pages, and that's a Mac program. So obviously the Mac program helps us to have a nice visual layout for things. But I think I used a flyer or something like that as the template. So really it wasn't that hard because it already came up with this layout, and I just had to enter in the information that made sense for Poll Everywhere. So for instance, the different types of questions you could answer. It doesn't have all of them, but it has a good idea of what types of questions you can do with Poll Everywhere. And on the bottom it also has steps for creating a poll and students respond. So that's a recipe for it. But remember, the Tech Talk assignment again requires you to do it pretty quick and talk about just what you need to, what is the tool? Briefly introduce it, give a quick how-to showing how to use it, show a realistic example of how it could be used in education, and tell whether or not you think you would use it in your own classroom and why or why not. Hopefully it's something that others would find useful too, to watch what you present in this class. As we move forward, though, that's all the activities that you have to do for this week. The example tech integration recipe sheet is just there for an example for you. And in fact, I'll probably move that back up to the first week so that all the tech integration things will be in the same spot after this week is over. But next week, you do need to be aware that the Meaningful Learning assignment is due. So next week, you'll learn about the next two elements of the Meaningful Learning Framework, intentional and cooperative learning, and finish that up. But then there is an assignment due at the end of next week, due January 28th at 11:59 p.m. And to look at this assignment real quick, it requires you to do some extra things. So your assignment is to explain or teach the Meaningful Learning Framework to someone who is unfamiliar with the framework by creating online media that can take many forms. So it needs to include a definition and example of each of the meaningful learning elements. And so be sure to define, explain, and give a good example of each of these 5 elements in your own words, and don't just copy text from the book or from class presentations. Obviously that would be plagiarism. So if you can create it though any way you want to. You can create a poster that tells about the Meaningful Learning Framework. You can create a podcast recording. You can create a storybook or a concept map and presentation or whatever it must be, but it must be completed online using one of the following tools or another tool that you know about and that you approved with me. So if you do want to choose something that's not on this list, you can approve that with me. So some of the tools for creating poster might include a Padlet or a Poplet, but those are kind of concept map tools as well. Or a podcast, you can use Podomatic maybe, or create a storybook with Storybird. And yeah, I don't have any instruction on how to use these tools. One of the big parts of this class is that you have to kind of spend some time exploring. Since we don't have time together face to face, you'll need to kind of invest a little bit of time in one of these tools, and maybe even more than one as you determine which one you want to use. And get into it a little bit, log in, create an account, log in, figure it out, how it works. I try not to pick ones that are difficult to use. I try to pick ones that are pretty simple so that you don't have to waste a lot of time trying to figure it out. But again, that's part of the class, right? This is a technology class, so I do expect you to explore within the technologies to figure out these tools. So that is the Meaningful Learning Framework assignment. It will be graded with this rubric here. Make sure that it's appropriate to an audience with little or no knowledge of the Meaningful Learning Framework. So you do have to explain it in pretty clear terms. It talks about each element, making sure that each is defined and explained well. And an example of that item is also there. So you want to think about it in different ways. For each element, you want to make sure you include an explanation / definition of what that element is in your own words, and then also an example. And that could be a picture, depending on the type of media you're going to create. There may be a picture that you can explain how it's an example of that type of learning, or maybe talk about it in a podcast episode or a recording. So those are the things that are required, and then of course it would need to be free of grammatical, spelling, and other errors. So that's the assignment really, and that's due by the end of next week. So be looking into those tools maybe a little bit. If you have a little bit of time this week, maybe look at what Poplet's all about, or Storybird, or Prezi, or whatever you have. And also with this class, try to learn something new. So if you already know about a lot of these technologies, I do want to encourage you to go a little bit beyond that. I mean, I don't need you to spend, hours and hours every week looking into new technologies and so forth, but stretch yourself a little bit to try to find something new and interesting that would be useful for you. And the reason why these are here is because these can also be used not just for assignments in my class, but they can also be used in your class. If you get into the tool and understand it a little more and spend some time in it, then you kind of can adopt that tool, and it can become a part of your toolbox, so to speak. And you can use that in your own class or in your own situation if it works. So that's why the exploration part of that assignment is there. You need to spend some time learning, and that's how it's set up. So remember though, that's not due this week, it's on the 28th. But you have all these activities to get started on this week. So it'll keep you busy. Alright, well, I think that's about it. So have a wonderful week, and good luck on your assignments and activities.